Welcome back to Godless and Grounded. When people hear the name Satan, they immediately picture a red-skinned creature with horns, a tail, and a pitchfork. He's supposed to be the ultimate enemy of God, the ruler of hell, and the reason humanity falls into sin. But here's the strange part. If you actually open up the earliest religious texts and read them, this character doesn't exist in the way most people imagine. The Satan we know today isn't some eternal villain who has always been there. He's a man-made character, shaped over thousands of years by different cultures, stories, and religious politics. If we go back to the earliest parts of the Bible, the Old Testament, Satan wasn't even a name. It was a title like the accuser or the adversary. In Hebrew, the word Satan simply meant an opponent, an accuser in court, or someone standing in your way. Sometimes it wasn't even referring to a supernatural being at all. It could be a human enemy. In the book of Numbers, for example, an angel of God is called a Satan because it stood in Balaam's way. So, in the earliest days, Satan was just a descriptive term. No horns, no hellfire, no kingdom of demons, just an adversary. This means that in early Jewish thought, there wasn't a cosmic bad guy working against God. In fact, God himself was often described as sending disasters, diseases, and enemies as punishment. If something bad happened, ancient Israelites didn't say, Satan did it. They said, God did it. The idea of an independent evil force wasn't part of the picture yet. So, how did we get from the accuser to the devil? The shift starts after centuries of contact with other cultures. When the Jewish people were conquered by the Babylonians in the 6th century BCE, they came into contact with Persian religion, Zoroastrianism. And in Zoroastrianism, there is a very clear dualism: a good god, Ahura Mazda, and an evil opponent, Angra Mainyu. These two forces are locked in a cosmic battle between good and evil. This idea was very different from early Jewish belief, but it was powerful. Over time, Jewish writings started to show more of this dualistic thinking. Instead of all bad things coming from God, some bad things were now blamed on a supernatural enemy. During the Second Temple period, between about 500 BCE and 70 CE, Jewish literature started to develop the idea of a more defined figure who opposed God and tempted humans. This is when the idea of Satan as a rebellious spirit started taking shape. Books like 1 Enoch, which is not in the Bible but was widely read in Jewish communities, describe angels who rebelled against God, fell to earth, and corrupted humanity. This was influenced by ancient myths about rebellious gods or spirits from Mesopotamia and Persia. The serpent in the Garden of Eden, for example, wasn't originally called Satan in the text of Genesis. That connection was made much later when interpreters started merging different traditions together. By the time of the New Testament, the figure of Satan had evolved even more. In the Gospels, Satan is now portrayed as a tempter, a deceiver, and the ruler of demons. He even tries to strike a deal with Jesus in the wilderness. This is a very different character from the adversary in the Old Testament. The change happened because Jewish culture was now heavily influenced by Hellenistic, Greek ideas and Roman rule. People were looking for someone to blame for the chaos in the world, and an evil supernatural villain fit perfectly. It's also important to remember that during this period, religion was a powerful political tool. If leaders wanted to unite people against a certain group, they could frame that group as being on Satan's side. This made Satan not just a theological concept, but a political weapon. Over time, Christian writers like Paul and later church fathers took the figure of Satan and expanded him into the cosmic arch-enemy of God. By the Middle Ages, Satan had become a central character in Christian thought, not because of any single biblical passage, but because of centuries of reinterpretation, cultural borrowing, and creative storytelling. The physical image of Satan, the horns, the hooves, the tail, comes even later, influenced by pagan gods like Pan from Greek mythology, who had goat-like features. Early Christians saw these pagan gods as rivals and demonized their images, literally turning them into the devil. That's why the devil in art often looks like a goat man. It was a way to make paganism look evil. If you think about it, this means that the Satan most people believe in is not some eternal truth. He's a patchwork of ideas. A courtroom accuser from Hebrew tradition, a cosmic villain from Persian religion, a tempter from Greek-influenced Jewish writings, and a horned monster borrowed from pagan art. He is, quite literally, a man-made invention. And here's a key point. The more you study the history of Satan, the more you see that he changes depending on the needs of the religion at the time. In the Old Testament, he's barely there. In the New Testament, he's suddenly very active. In the Middle Ages, he becomes an obsession. In modern times, his image is used in movies, heavy metal music, and political speeches. That kind of flexibility is a huge sign that we're dealing with a cultural creation, not an eternal supernatural being. Even within Christianity, there are disagreements about who Satan is and what he does. Some Christians think Satan is a literal fallen angel. Others think he's just a symbol for human evil. Some Protestant groups barely talk about him, while some evangelical groups make him the main focus of their sermons. In Islam, there's Iblis, a jinn who refused to bow to Adam, which is a different origin story altogether. Again, these are not consistent universal descriptions. They're tailored to each tradition's beliefs and needs. If Satan were real and objective, you'd expect all religions to describe him the same way, but they don't. Instead, each culture invents its own version, using him as a character to explain why bad things happen or why people disobey God. It's the same way different cultures have different monster myths: vampires, werewolves, dragons. They all serve a purpose in storytelling, but their existence is not based on reality. We also have to talk about how Satan has been used to control people. Throughout history, leaders have warned that questioning them is satanic. During the witch hunts in Europe, tens of thousands of people, mostly women, were tortured and killed because they were accused of making pacts with the devil. This fear of Satan was deliberately used to enforce religious authority and suppress dissent. Even today, some preachers will call certain music, books, or lifestyles from Satan just to scare people into obedience. Now here's the ironic part. If you read the Bible closely, Satan is never described as ruling over hell. That idea comes from medieval literature like Dante's Inferno and Milton's Paradise Lost, which are works of fiction. In traditional Christian theology, hell was created by God as a place of punishment, and Satan himself is supposed to be thrown into it at the end. The whole Satan as the king of hell image is more pop culture than scripture, but it's so deeply ingrained that people assume it's in the Bible. This tells us something very important. Most people's beliefs about Satan aren't based on their holy texts. They're based on cultural storytelling. It's a mix of ancient myth, political propaganda, and creative imagination. That's not to say the idea of Satan hasn't been powerful. It has inspired fear, obedience, and even whole industries, from exorcism rituals to horror movies. But power doesn't equal truth. And if you step back and think logically, the concept of Satan also raises some tough questions for believers. If God is all-powerful, why create Satan in the first place? Why let him exist for thousands of years, tempting and corrupting billions of people? Why not destroy him immediately? If Satan can openly defy God and get away with it, is God really in control? Believers often answer these questions with free will, but that doesn't really work for a supposedly all-knowing God who already knows the outcome. Allowing a powerful evil being to roam free and harm people doesn't sound like perfect love or perfect justice. It sounds like bad planning. This is where history helps us see the bigger picture. The more we learn about how different cultures invented and adapted their own evil figure, the clearer it becomes that Satan is a product of human imagination, shaped by fear and the need to explain suffering. By the Middle Ages, the figure of Satan had become one of the most useful tools in the hands of religious authorities. The church wasn't just telling people that Satan tempted them. They were telling them he was everywhere, watching, plotting, waiting to drag them into eternal torment. Fear of Satan became a powerful motivator for obedience. This period saw the explosion of detailed demonology. Entire books were written about how many demons there were, what their names were, what sins they tempted people with, and how to spot someone under their influence. The strange part is, none of this came directly from the Bible. It was creative invention, mixing scripture with folklore, old pagan myths, and even superstition from rural communities. People genuinely believed that diseases, crop failures, or even a bad dream could be caused by demonic activity. This obsession with Satan and demons fueled events like the Inquisition. Religious courts hunted down heretics, people whose beliefs didn't match the official church teaching, and accused them of serving the devil. In this way, Satan became a catch-all enemy. If you disagreed with the church, you weren't just wrong, you were on the devil's side. And in an age where religion and government were deeply intertwined, that was a death sentence. One of the most infamous results of this thinking was the witch trials. Between the 15th and 18th centuries, tens of thousands of people, mostly women, were accused of making pacts with Satan. They were tortured until they confessed, often inventing wild stories just to make the pain stop. Many were burned alive or hanged, and all of it was justified by the belief in a devil who was actively recruiting humans to his cause. Looking back, it's painfully clear. Satan was not just a theological figure, he was a weapon of control and fear. Even art and literature played a huge role in cementing the modern image of Satan. Dante Alighieri's Inferno in the 14th century imagined Satan frozen in ice at the center of hell, huge and monstrous. John Milton's Paradise Lost in the 17th century gave him a complex personality, a tragic rebel who famously says, "Better to reign in hell than serve in heaven." These works were fiction, but they shaped popular belief more than any sermon. The fact that most people today imagine Satan based on these fictional portrayals shows how much human creativity, not divine revelation, shaped the concept. As Europe moved into the Renaissance and Enlightenment periods, belief in Satan remained, but the way he was used shifted. In Protestant Reformation debates, Catholics and Protestants accused each other of being agents of the devil. In political struggles, rulers used satanic imagery to paint their enemies as evil. Even in colonial times, missionaries described indigenous religions as devil worship to justify conversion and conquest. It's a recurring pattern. Invent an ultimate enemy, then use him to unite your side and destroy the opposition. In the modern era, Satan has taken on new forms. In the 20th century, the satanic panic swept parts of the Western world, especially in the United States. Rumors spread that hidden cults were sacrificing children, infiltrating schools, and planting subliminal messages in music. Almost all of these stories turned out to be false, fueled by media hype, unreliable testimony, and fear-mongering preachers. But the damage was real. Innocent people were accused, lives were ruined, and fear of Satan was used once again to control public opinion. Today, the figure of Satan exists in multiple layers. In some fundamentalist circles, he's still treated as a literal, active being who can influence your thoughts, tempt you, and possess you. In pop culture, he's often a symbol, sometimes of pure evil, other times of rebellion or independence. Some modern groups even use Satan as a tongue-in-cheek mascot for free thought, not because they believe in him, but because he represents questioning authority. The Satanic Temple, for example, is a non-theistic organization that uses satanic imagery to challenge religious privilege in government. The fact that Satan can be so many different things to different people, a literal demon, a political symbol, a fictional villain, or even a joke, tells us something important. He's not fixed. He changes depending on the story people want to tell. And that's the hallmark of a human invention. Real beings don't shift personalities, appearances, and roles so drastically over time. Myths do. There's also a psychological side to this. Humans have always had a tendency to personify abstract ideas. We turn love into Cupid, death into the Grim Reaper, and evil into the devil. It's easier to imagine fighting a person than fighting an abstract concept like greed or cruelty. By giving evil a face and a name, religions made it easier to teach moral lessons, but also easier to manipulate people. If you can convince someone that an invisible enemy is plotting against them and that you alone know how to protect them, you gain enormous power over their lives. And that's exactly what happened with Satan. He became the perfect scapegoat. If something went wrong, it wasn't God's fault. It was Satan's. If you committed a sin, it wasn't just your human weakness. Satan tempted you. This allowed religious authorities to maintain the image of an all-good God while still explaining the existence of suffering and evil. It's a clever theological solution, but also a deeply flawed one. After all, if God created everything, he must have created Satan too. And if God is truly all-powerful, Satan could only exist if God allowed it. This leads to the uncomfortable truth that many believers avoid. The God versus Satan narrative works more like a dramatic story than a logical explanation of reality. It has a hero, a villain, a battle, and an ending. That's why it's compelling. It's the same structure we see in myths, fairy tales, and Hollywood movies. But just because a story is compelling doesn't make it true. When we strip away the centuries of art, politics, and theology, we find that Satan started as a simple word meaning adversary. He was shaped by cultural exchanges with Persia, adapted into Jewish and Christian thought, expanded in the Middle Ages, dramatized by poets, and marketed by preachers. He's been used to justify wars, executions, censorship, and moral panics. And yet, despite all the fear he's generated, there's no evidence outside of religious tradition that he exists at all. The real question isn't, who is Satan? It's, why did humans invent him? And the answer seems clear: to explain evil, to unite communities against a common enemy, and to create a powerful tool for control. As long as people are willing to believe in an unseen, all-powerful villain, there will always be those willing to use that belief for their own purposes. So, who invented Satan? Not God, not some cosmic accident. Humans did. And like all human inventions, he has evolved, adapted, and survived because he serves a purpose. Whether that purpose is moral teaching, fear-based control, or simply entertainment, it's always been about what people need him to be. And that, more than anything, shows that he's a creation of human imagination, not a timeless, supernatural truth.